local news, community stories, and the conversations that matter most. Now, more Daybreak with Brian and Jamie.
Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us here on the Civic Media Network. It is 8:35 right now. I am Jamie Martinson.
And I'm Brian Noonan. In February, the Wisconsin Assembly passed a bill to protect against lawsuits that were intended to discourage news coverage and quiet free speech. They also had measures in there requiring schools to adopt policies on appropriate communications between staff and students and establishing a definition of anti-Semitism. The bill was designed to protect people from SLAPPs. Now, if you're not familiar with that term or those kind of lawsuits, don't worry. Gabe Rotman is here. He's the Vice President for Policy for the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. They are the leading pro bono legal service organization for journalists and newsrooms in the United States, and he is here to explain what SLAPPs are, how they affect us here in Wisconsin, and how they affect the media landscape and free speech. Gabe, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. As a couple of people who make their living in media and dabble in free speech, it's very interesting, as it should be for everybody. But let's start at the beginning. What are SLAPP laws? And on the flip side, anti-SLAPP legislation, which is what we've got proposed here in Wisconsin.
So, yeah, and thanks for having me. So a SLAPP law, it's a catchy acronym, but it's not very descriptive. It stands for strategic lawsuit against public participation. And it was a type of lawsuit that was identified by some academics and advocates, a couple decades ago. Basic idea is, lawsuits are expensive. If you get sued, right, there's a lot that's going to have to happen. I mean, if it's your first time getting sued, it's a traumatic experience. And it also, it's expensive. You need to go through a process that the lawyers call discovery, where you need to produce documents, you need to answer questions, you need to sit for depositions. So all of that is very disruptive. And the idea with a SLAPP suit is that it is a lawsuit that's brought by a deep-pocketed interest that they don't really hope to win. They're not bringing the suit because they think that they've got a good case. They're bringing the suit because they want to put you to the expense and trauma of having to defend the lawsuit in the hope that you'll shut up. And that's the basic idea, right? Is that it's it is a lawsuit that's brought to try and intimidate somebody, press or no, into not speaking out about an issue of public concern. And then anti-SLAPP laws, which are, the Wisconsin Assembly passed this particular statute. Versions of the law that the Assembly passed have been passing in states around the country, and they basically give you an exit valve quick in the case. So the lawsuit's brought, somebody sues you because you're exercising your free speech or free press rights. You can go to court and say, listen, court, this case is not meritorious. Please dismiss it quickly, limit the expense, let me keep talking.
Gabe, over at the website, rcfp.org, which is where you can find more from Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, you guys have a great section about the anti-SLAPP laws. You actually have a really great graphic that explains some of the different cases regarding anti-SLAPP around the country. So I would advise anybody to go take a look at that if you want to explore this a little bit more. But when it comes to Wisconsin's Assembly bill, the anti-SLAPP bill, what problems specifically to Wisconsin are you seeing that lawmakers are trying to solve with this type of legislation?
Yeah, so there is a case that's highlighted on the website from 2020 where you had a relatively small station in Wisconsin that was sued by the Trump campaign, I believe, for airing an ad, back during COVID, and the reason why a station like that could become a target for a lawsuit is precisely because Wisconsin doesn't have a law in the books that would give you the opportunity to, again, go to court and say, listen, judge, this case doesn't have legs. Please kick it early. And so ultimately what can happen is if you don't have uniform protections around the country. And again, fortunately, the trajectory has been that states are very amenable to passing not just anti-SLAPP laws, but a pretty strong version of anti-SLAPP laws that has been, it's a model law. So lots of lawyers got in a room and hashed out what the best version of this would look like, and that's what's at play in Wisconsin. But ultimately, what happens and what this case shows from 2020 is that if you don't have a law in the books, that litigants who are looking to file SLAPP suits will identify states that don't have strong protections and then bring cases there.
That case that we were talking about was at WJFW in Rhinelander. They're an NBC affiliate. Now, what the ad they were sued over was also published in ProPublica. Is it the strategy when they weaponize these lawsuits not only to come to states that don't have anti-SLAPP, but to go after smaller outlets? This media group has like 6 stations, not a lot of money. Is it to put them out of business? Is it to just force them to give in and pay up? What is the end goal? Because you're not going after ProPublica. They're big. They've got lawyers. They can handle things. But you're going after a small station. So what's the end game?
Yeah, so I think that's right. I mean, there's a couple of things going on. First of all, news organizations and reporters are pretty intrepid. They're not easily intimidated. But it's introducing into the calculus. Is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Mm-hmm. And so what you're talking about is, even if you want to do your job, you're still second guessing, and that self-censorship is part of the problem that these anti-SLAPP laws are trying to address. And so I think that's exactly right. I mean, one, you can go after smaller news organizations or smaller private speakers who may not have the resources to defend a defamation suit or another type of. This usually occurs in the context of defamation. Mm-hmm. But it can be other types of lawsuits. But ultimately, these things are expensive, right? And they're a huge time suck. And when you're thinking about whether you're going to need to put in the effort and the expense to defend yourself, maybe you won't speak in the first place. And that's why SLAPP suits are so dangerous, because they have this speech suppressive effect, beyond just the lawsuit, the individual lawsuit itself.
We're talking with Gabe Rotman. He's the Vice President of Policy at Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, rcfp.org, if you want to find out more about what they do. Now, we've been talking a lot about the media, and a lot of people, when it comes to SLAPP laws, are going to hear the press freedom and assume that this only affects journalists. But how could an anti-SLAPP law protect even ordinary citizens who speak out at city council meetings, maybe protest, or even post criticism online, Gabe?
Well, so that's exactly so. And in fact, when people were starting to think about and identify this category of cases, SLAPP cases, it wasn't traditional news organizations or journalists who were often the target. It was, the prototypical case was a blogger who was complaining about land development plans, and then the land developer would sue the blogger for defamation or a similar claim, in an attempt to just shut the person down. So this is really, so it certainly is a crucial protection for the press, but it's not limited to the press, and it's really about ensuring that all speakers don't have that second guessing when they're speaking on matters of public concern.
Gabe, there's been a lot of debate lately from people who, the media's they're fake news. It doesn't matter what the media says. And we've seen, on another point, we've seen all these large media companies just settle these lawsuits, even lawsuits that they have said they could have won. There was no basis, but they paid them off anyway. Why should people be concerned about this? The fact that we're paying off. We see what's happening at CBS. We see what's happening with, like you said, individual citizens, but people don't seem to grasp the magnitude of this kind of thing. How is this affecting not only media, but in big media companies, but small media companies, and why should we be so worried?
Mm-hmm. Well, so there's a couple of things going on there with those settlements, right? And they bring in kind of other areas of press freedom law. Part of the concern there, and I'm not suggesting this is the case with any individual incident or lawsuit, but there have been mistakes made in how policy has been set, especially when you're talking about something like the Federal Communications Commission. And the Federal Communications Commission has the ability to regulate. So first of all, when we're talking about broadcast radio and television, so broadcast radio and television, unlike cable or unlike wholly digital outlets, they're licensed by the FCC. That gives the FCC an enormous amount of power over those licensees. And so when we're talking about the power of the government to try and influence news coverage, right? The existence of that regulatory authority is what gives you leverage over broadcasters, and that's really what we should be flagging, right? Especially given the efforts of the current FCC chair to revive lots of policies and rules at the FCC that can be used to try and influence coverage one way or the other. So ultimately, the short answer to your question is when we're talking about those cases, the CBS settlement and the like, we also need to be looking at the authority that we've given the federal government to try and squeeze news organizations across the board, which, as you note, will ultimately land more heavily on smaller and less well-resourced news organizations.
As we come back, take a look back in Wisconsin with this particular bill that's been proposed by the Assembly. If this makes it through the Senate, it's approved, the bill lands on Governor Evers' desk, he signs it. What kind of real-world changes would our listeners, who might be listening to what you're saying today, trying to take all of this in, what real-world changes would they maybe notice on how the courts are handling some of these lawsuits that are tied to that public criticism or even just reporting in general in the state of Wisconsin?
Well, so first of all, the hope is that the lawsuits won't be brought in the first place, right? So these harassing, unmeritorious lawsuits won't be brought in the first place. That is the hope, and that's usually the effect. A lawsuit like the WJFW lawsuit, because it's a different, there's the pain that is imposed by bringing the case is lessened. Now, putting on the lawyer hat, right? What will ultimately happen is if a lawsuit is brought against you for the exercise of your free speech rights or free press rights, you're commenting on an issue of public concern. Let's say you're criticizing a public official and they don't like that, and they bring a case. Effectively, you can go to court. You can file what's called a special motion to dismiss, which happens very early in the case, and you say, look, again, Judge, this case doesn't have legs. They haven't established, they haven't provided you enough to maintain the lawsuit. And then you kick the case very early before it gets to that discovery process that I mentioned, where you've got to spend money on lawyers, sit for depositions, search through your documents, produce so all of that is avoided. So the cases become, even if these frivolous cases are brought, they become much less expensive, and that also diminishes the incentive to bring them in the first place.
Well, Gabe, thanks very much. Gabe Rotman has been our guest. He's Vice President of Policy for the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. You could go to rcfp.org to see all the work that they do there. Thank you for that work, Gabe, and we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having me.